Hello, world. This is Jared Deal. This is the podcast. If you guys listened to the very first 12 episodes, that was my intro. I said, hello, world. Like, those are the first two words I said. So, still got to figure out if people from other countries are listening. That's something I can, I think, pay a little extra for with the stats. But thank you guys for being here. This is the third episode in a row where I talk about faith, and it's also been three men, which is awesome. Bill, Michael Ward, who wrote Six Sola, and then now this episode with my friend John. So yeah, guys, the faith series again is just a part of the podcast because it's important to me to try to stay humble and have a fresh perspective on the upbringing that I've had with church and the journey I'm on now. And I'd love to do more episodes, solo episodes as well, talking to you about, not necessarily deconstruction, but just thoughts on church and God and how that affects things. But John has written a book, and you can go onto his website, brokenandredeemed.com, and you can order it. It's going to print and be available everywhere in I think in August. So he is a professional fitness coach, men's discipleship leader with a passion for seeing lives changed by Jesus Christ. He's a former football coach and Marine Corps veteran of Desert Storm. John's life was radically transformed from a self-destructive trajectory to one of life, wholeness, and a dynamic walk with Christ. A story that is told in the pages of Broken and Redeemed. That's the book I was just referencing. John holds a master's degree in physical education from Ohio University, and as of his writing is close to completing a master's degree in theology from Faith Seminary in Tacoma, Washington, where he resides. Guys, I hope you enjoy Faith series again. Third episode in a row with that. My conversation with John.
Something like that. Yeah. So my story starts. I grew up in a very abusive alcoholic family. My dad was very abusive, and so I don't have much memory of my childhood from 0 to age 12. So the trauma was so bad that my counselor feels that it's been blocked and suppressed, and trying to find out what it is and what it was is probably more traumatic than not knowing at all. Yeah. And so, that was my, I didn't grow up in the church. We had no church presence in that. And, the only time I ever heard the word God or Jesus was when I visited my grandmother in Arkansas, and she told me that God had something special planned for me, which right. Now she's probably smiling down from heaven because she knew the book was going to be happening anyway. So,
God bless grandmas and moms.
Yeah. Well, and it's that. It goes to that, you have to have people praying over you, because when you're not a believer, I mean, you grew up in the church, I didn't, but when you don't know Christ and you have people praying over you on a daily basis, I think the Spirit covers you. And, because I did a lot of crazy things, and I look back on them and I'm like, I can see now where the Holy Spirit actually was intertwined in the decisions I made. Right. But at the time, you have no idea. You just think you're going on with life. Right. And so that was the interesting part of this when I looked back upon it. But it wasn't really until I moved back home up here to the Northwest that I looked at my life and I saw some patterns of self-destructive behavior. And so I sought out counseling and found a spiritual mentor. And through the two of those, Christina and Scotty, is where the work really came. And so it was with Scotty and Christina, the work that I did with them is to where I became truly free of my past and was able to surrender to Christ. And, I explain all of that in Broken and Redeemed. There's a lot that the book is multifaceted. And, that's what I said earlier before we started recording, Jared, that I liked how you important in today's society, especially coming out of COVID, because we were so separated, and depression was such a big thing during those 2 years because we were isolated. And, we've got to figure out a way to remove the stigma of getting people to seek mental health. I mean, you look at all the mass shootings, and, people are saying it's got to be gun control. Well, it's, the people behind the gun have some issues, and if the mental health needs, I think our government also needs to look at gun control, but it also needs to look at how can we provide better mental health health for people who need it and can't afford it. Because as you know, it's pretty expensive if you don't have insurance. And so I think there needs to be a government subsidy with that or something like that for the people who can't afford it, because seeking, and then, getting that stigma of, if I go to a counselor, people think I'm crazy. Well, you're crazy already. We already know that. Everybody's crazy. I used to tell my brother that all the time because I tried to get him to go to, my brothers grew up in the same household as I did, and they refused to go to counseling. I'm saying, guys, you need to go. It's going to help you. But, it's.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not so much that we're all crazy. I get what you're saying.
Right.
Because I think, especially even in church, crazy is like the book of Acts is crazy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All the apostles could be perceived as crazy. Like, Jesus could be perceived as crazy, right? Like Paul is getting stoned and then dying and then going back into the same place. So we go, well, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But then, if you have a manic episode in modern times,
right?
You go, oh, that's crazy. So it's not. I think it's sure some people can go through life and then we get jealous of those people. We're like, oh, you're all healed and stable. Right. But I was gonna ask, one of the things we have in common is I didn't have a really good relationship with my dad either.
Mm-hmm.
I just did a episode of my last episode. I talked about I went and saw Top Gun 2 and I cried like the whole time because it reminded me of childhood and playing hockey and played ice hockey. My dad he played the soundtrack to the first. Anyway, it got me, and there was like kind of this, movies are weird because it's like you don't expect to be moved by things sometimes.
Right.
It gets you, and you're like, oh, I'm alone in this theater.
Well, I have to admit, I went and saw it too. I went and saw it a couple weeks ago, and there were times when I teared up in that movie as well.
Gosh,
so
it just got me, man.
Yeah.
But it was, and so I'm like, anyway, I'm like, oh, I'm still talking about my dad,
Right.
And so I know that, I don't know if you have kids now, but like, I don't have kids, so it's like, oh, I'm a dad and I'm seeing all these things,
Right.
But my dad has been a huge part of the whole mental health thing because he was really undiagnosed himself, but he also yelled a lot. He was abusive.
Right.
So like, what was some of that journey like coming out of that voice in your head? Like angry and God's like this, maybe,
Well, the when you grow up in violence, it's hard to overcome that sometimes because it's all you know. And so, there were times when, through my life that the temper got a hold of me. But with my dad and I, we really didn't see each other after he left too much. And then it was more of a distance relationship. And, but after I got out of the Marine Corps, or when I was in the Marine Corps and I was in Okinawa and I came home on leave, I flew over to his house because I had started thinking about and reflecting on my childhood and what was being said from my mom's side and that when the divorce happened and everything. And so I wanted to find the truth. And so, I walked up to the door, knocked on my door, knocked on my dad's door, and when he opened it up, I popped him in the mouth. And, this is not the best way to start the rebuilding of a relationship. But like I said, that's what we knew. And, he stood up and he wiped the blood off his lip and he said, I deserve that. And let's go have a beer and talk. And so we went down in his basement and we sat and talked for hours and upon hours. And from that point on, we had a relationship until he passed away in 2003. And so, it was, just facing that and, he was, to see him open to what I was wanting to know and questioning and, seeking, his forgiveness for what he did and all that stuff. I think that's what really helped because he was truly open to it. And then my stepmom had two daughters and one of them was a heroin addict and she died on the delivery table when she was giving birth. So now my stepmom and my dad have this baby. And what are they going to do? And they chose to raise it. And watching my dad with that kid, I looked at it as his way to make amends for what he did with us. And it was truly a blessing to sit and watch how he took care of that kid. And, I could have been jealous, because I didn't get that. But I saw it as my dad trying to make that amends for, what he did with us and not to make the same mistakes. So that was a blessing. So.
Yeah. And so you also talked about how, thanks for sharing. I mean, it's, two grown men now, talking about their dads, but I know Father is coming up soon too, and but Yeah, it's a big subject because a lot of people have abuse and pain, or they don't have a dad at all. And
Correct.
you're talking about the shootings that have been happening, right? There's always
Mm-hmm.
not always, but a lot of times it comes out like, oh, the guy, had a horrible relationship with his parents,
Right.
and it's just
Right. Right.
fatherlessness is a curse, and
Yeah, it is a curse, and what I was a PE teacher and football coach in high school for a long time, and so I dealt with fatherless children a lot. That's one of the reasons why I did it, because I wanted to try to help kids not go down the same path that I did, and but still making mistakes along the way. But it's being father, and that's the one thing I learned as I started to grow in my faith is, we need to teach these kids that they do have a father, and it's Jesus Christ and God, that they can turn to Him as a father and get fulfillment there. And when you're 16 years old and your dad left or beat you up or whatever, it's hard to turn to that and see that. So it's critical, I think, that we get these kids mentors that are strong in faith and that can help them work through some of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even in Scripture, it's like Jesus is who we think of when we think of Christianity. Is like Jesus, right? But then Jesus in like John's gospel, named after you. No, I'm kidding.
I think I'm named after him.
There you go. No, I'm kidding. Jared, I got a couple verses in the Old Testament, but you got a whole book, man. So
well, I actually have two because my middle name's Matthew.
Nice. No way.
Yeah.
You got two gospel names, and wow.
Yep.
Like my nephews are all Old Testament names, so it's like
okay.
Anyway, it doesn't make us more spiritual. We're like, it's just in the Bible.
No, it just
there's a ton of weird names that no one picks. So
correct.
But yeah, like Jesus is saying, John's gospel, like I only do what the Father does. I do what my Father, and the religious people are obviously like offended by that. They're also offended by Jesus being a man and saying he's God. So
right.
But I think we're not. We just kind of project our own earthly father image onto God, then maybe we're like, we think he's mad or he's disappointed. But what was also you didn't grow up in church, like you said,
right?
And I might have missed it because we had the little glitch. But when did you really come to the faith?
I started seeking more probably when I was in Georgia coaching, because I got involved in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so I started trying to spend a little more time learning what the Gospels said and what the Bible said.
Right.
Then when I moved back home in 2005, one of my assistant coaches had his own church, and so I started attending there. And so, but I cautioned, because as I was going through that, I was still having some of my old behavior and doing some of my own things and not giving up complete control. And there's a verse in 1 John 1, and it's 5-10, and it talks about Jesus is light, and if we claim to have fellowship but continue to walk in the darkness, we don't have a relationship in us, but the truth is not in us. And when I read that one morning, that really just, it was like a punch to the gut, because that's what I was doing. And it really, and that was in November of 2016, and that's really when I went, okay, I've got to change my life if I'm gonna have this relationship, and that's when I started really trying to abide and looking at my life and self-examination and exploring the things that I've done that are of godlike, and trying to get rid of those and get them out of my life pattern, because you get into a pattern, your life becomes a pattern, and when you become a Christian, you have salvation as soon as you accept Christ, but it's the sanctification that takes a while, because you have to look at yourself and you have to, examine what your heart is, and then take that heart of stone and let God change it. And that's the hard part of Christianity. And when you do that, though, that's when the freedom really comes. And that's what I talk a lot about in the book, is just working through those, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly of Christianity, because it's what you've learned, what I learned in all of that, and how I got through it, and the part of it is having that good spiritual mentor. Because you got to have somebody that's going to walk with you.
Yeah, well, for sure, it's like you could study the things of the scripture, which the Bible is a lot of information, right? So no one knows everything, and but then if you only do it like by yourself or whatever, right? You still could have like a certain level of transformation, but it's really the community of like, and I know church for a lot of people is like, I don't want to go to church, like, but it's really not really about church. It's just connecting with people, and
the church is hard to find that. The church is you and I. I mean, we're considered the church. It's the body of Christ. It's any believer. Yeah. The building isn't the church, and you don't necessarily have to. We have to have communion. We have to have horizontal relationships, but it doesn't have to be in a church. You just need to have those relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
At least that's my belief. And you got to have somebody that you can, that helps hold you accountable, and that you can help hold accountable as well. And that's discipleship, and that's one of Jesus' great commandments. He said, "Go and make disciples of all nations." He didn't tell us how to do it; he just told us to do it. And so, that's the part of it, is where that relationship comes. Because I was discipled by Scotty. Now I'm trying to disciple other people. And if I run into a problem, I just pick up the phone. Hey, Scotty, this is what's going on, and he helps me work through it because he's more mature in his faith and his walk. And so you have to build those relationships, and that's the biggest thing I'd give to your listeners if they're struggling with something, is to find somebody more mature in their faith and ask if they'll disciple them, and then listen to what they say and work through it. So
and then hopefully eventually you can, I totally agree with you, and then you can then pour into somebody else.
Correct. I mean, it says in scriptures, we go through our hard times to help others when they are going through hard times. That's a paraphrase. It's not the exact biblical verse, but that's what it talks about in there.
Yeah, bearing burdens, kind of thing.
Exactly. And the process that Scotty used with me, he calls it the Big 10, and with his permission, it's in my book. So that's a 10-step plan to disciple people, and so and it's in the book. So if you're interested in discipleship, it's a great plan. It's simple to use. When you look at it at first, it seems complex, but it's not. And you could be a Christian of 1 week and use that Big 10 and disciple somebody. So
as far as your like kind of mental health journey and healing, my opinions about a lot of things have transformed over the years, which is probably a good thing, right? Because I always want to be learning and open. But did you ever use medication to help you, or were you able to kind of?
There was only one time I did, and I didn't like it because I don't like to be. It just the medication affects people differently, and it did not. It dragged me down, and it actually caused me to be a little more depressed, and so I didn't want to do it. But it was a bridge to get me through that time. So it helped. But I got off it as soon as I could. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always just curious because now I'm a little bit more like, I take medication. I've been on meds for a while, and my own journey was like, I had a really bad time when I got off all of it, but I did that without a doctor. So it's like, I'm always curious when people are like, yeah, I was on meds and then I got off, and sometimes it comes off as like, oh, well, that sounds super easy for you, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
it's the thing.
Don't do it on your own, but if you try for like 2 weeks, that's different,
Well, and make sure that you're on the right meds, because do your own research. Go to the when they say, hey, we're going to put you on the X, Y, or Z med. Go look and see what those potential side effects are. And I mean, I was on one, and it's 1% of the population got migraines, and I was 1% of that population.
Yeah. Or like you said, it makes depression worse if it's an antidepressant.
Yeah, and so and then when you come off of it, know how there's some meds that you have to scale off. There's others you can quit immediately, because it's the chemicals in your brain, it's the dopamine and all that stuff, and so that gets into physiology, and you gotta trust the doctors that they know what you're doing, but they also need to listen to you too. So
I was gonna ask you too, when you were in the military, did you go overseas?
No. Well, just Okinawa. I was in Okinawa, Korea, for about 1.5 years, but not in any combat. I got out right after Desert Storm. Didn't have to go over to Iraq or to Kuwait. So I was in during Desert Storm, but I stayed here in the States. So.
Oh, cool. And then so tell me a little bit about the writing thing, because were you always kind of a journaler? Like, Or you
No,
didn't know?
no,
You just like how did
no.
the whole process? I'm always curious. People like, because I know books
Well,
take a long time. It's like it took me a
they do.
year. It
They
took this, and you know.
Yeah, they do take a long time, and this one took from the start of this one um, till the completion was actually 7 years. But I didn't work on it the whole time. In 2014, my counselor told me I should write a book, and I kind of laughed at her. Told a few friends about it, and they said, "Yeah, John, you need to write a book." And so, being that I have dyslexia, I'm a Marine, I'm a PE teacher, and a football coach. I wasn't really a writer. And so I tried to help, like, look for somebody to be a ghostwriter for me. I found a young lady who was a writer at our church, and we started working together, and we outlined my book. I had all the chapters outlined. I started writing in it. I got about 5 chapters done, and then I put it on a shelf because it just didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I just didn't feel that I could finish the book. And then probably 20, well, actually, it was February of last year. So February of 21, I was reading in my morning scripture, and I came across Hebrews 10:36, and it said, when you're doing the will of God, you have to persevere to get what he's promised. And then about an hour later, I was reading in a book from one of my favorite authors, and it was his very first book. And he said that when you're doing the will of God, he said, when I was writing this book, no one told me if anybody would read the book or buy the book. I just had to write it, and those things happened within about an hour. And so I went, okay, it's time to finish the book.
Cool.
And kind of in between there, I'll backtrack just a little bit. I working with Scotty, I got a tug to go deeper in the Word, so I enrolled. I'm 8 hours shy of a master's of theology, and so that schooling, I was still in school when all this started. And then
Oh, cool! Wow.
so I stopped school and I told myself I was going to write 2 hours a day in the book until it was done. And Jared, I finished the book in 4 weeks.
Wow.
So I wrote 9 chapters in 4 weeks. I submitted that manuscript to a editor. I told the editor, I said, look, I have dyslexia. She goes, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And turned out she was a scout for Morgan James Publishing. So I finished the book in mid-March, submitted it to Arlen. We started working on it. We submitted it to Morgan James in August of 2021. I got the acceptance letter, and then February of this year, I had a book in my hand. That's how fast it went, and I credit all of that to just being obedient to God, and listening to Him, and doing that, and all this stuff happened. So it was just a true blessing, true honor, and it's just been an amazing ride. So
how long's the book?
it's 15 chapters. It's 15 chapters. It's about 190 pages from front to back. It's super easy read. So it's called Literary Titans. They gave me a book award, 5-star review, and then Goodreads, which is an online book selling distributor. They gave me 4 out of 4 stars. And it's just the reviews from people online have just been fantastic. So it's been a true blessing.
Getting the ebook. So this is before it's. So you've done the book. You got all these awards. You weren't really a writer before. I know that's something I kind of hear people say, and I think it's cool and then the fact that you wrote it in 4 weeks, I relate to like some of that a little bit, where I started doing poetry when I had like my episodes, but anyway, I'm kind of tired of talking about the writing, because now I'm like, I need to just do it, man, and I've had a lot of people on, and I try to read their books, so I'll definitely buy your book when it comes out, and maybe we can have you on again and talk about it.
Yeah, we'd love that. Love that.
And I was going to ask you too, are you going to do like a Audible version?
Yeah, the publishing company takes care of that. It doesn't come out until after it hits the bookstore. Right. I'm trying to figure out if I could get Morgan Freeman to read the book, because it would be really cool.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He probably doesn't write back fast.
No, it's either him or
you don't want to read it yourself because it's kind of your story.
No, because it's hard for me to read out loud because of my dyslexia.
Oh, okay.
So because I'll skip words and see words backwards and stuff, and so it's tough for me to read out loud. So
yeah, I have a friend who does that. He reads stuff. So if you're interested, but I know a lot of people that I've had on, I've gotten like the physical copy, and then they're like, oh, I have it on Audible, and then I listen.
Yeah, I asked the publisher about it, and they said they don't do the Audible until it hits bookstores, so it won't be out probably.
So you gotta give it time.
Yeah, it probably won't get out. The Audible probably won't be out till probably September, October. So
what would you say not to give away too much so people can go
Mhm.
read it, but what would you say is kind of the main message of the book? Because the title is Broken and Redeemed, so we're all broken because of sin and our world, but God loves us, and redemption is, you know, I'm giving you my interpretation. Sorry. No, I don't even know. I have to read it.
No, here's the thing, the main theme of the book is just, I talk about where I come from,
Right.
and my brokenness, and then the redeeming factor that you can find in Christ, and just my journey to the complete surrender, and to be able to have that, because it's what I found out along the way is until you give up complete control, because I was a control freak. I didn't want to give up total control. Even as I was maturing as a Christian, I always said I want it in John's timing, and it never worked out. And then once I gave up that control and said, God, you're in control. I'm giving you everything. Things started happening, and to be able to see the evidence of God working in your life when you do that and just let Him take over. I mean, and I'll give you one example. I owned a small business, and when we were trying to get rid of the business, we were shutting down because of COVID. I had one of my investors call me. It was a $10,000 debt, and he said, "John, he goes, you don't have to worry about it." And I wasn't even praying about that,
Right.
And it's just those kind of things, and I didn't even talk to him. He heard through the grapevine that we were closing, because I hadn't got a chance to talk to him yet, and he just called me and said, "Look, this was an investment. You don't have to worry about it." And one day, if I'm able to, I'll pay him back. Just out of the kindness. So.
All that book money. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. If it becomes a bestseller, then I don't have to worry too much. So.
Well, no, there's something cool. I think sometimes writing can feel a little self-absorbed. Sometimes, maybe.
Well,
it's your
for
story,
me.
it's you. But it's
Yeah,
also
the thing about it was.
Yeah.
The thing about it was, Jared, is my counselor, her saying you should write a book. I think her main goal of that was because the writing of the book was part of the healing process.
Yeah, exactly.
And and so going through all that, and to be honest, the hardest part of the book was talking about the mistakes I made and the transgressions and the people that it affected, because I didn't want to reopen those wounds. But some of it needed to be discussed, and we did a very good job of doing that without exposing too many people or too many things. And that was the toughest part of the book, is to be able to explain the brokenness side of that, and to work through that. So
yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think it is self-absorbed. I think it's what you just said. I think it's it's believing in yourself enough through God's grace to realize but we all have a story and wisdom, right? It's like Scripture talks about wisdom and revelation, right? And so revelation is like things getting open to us over time. But we do have to do the work on ourselves to kind of like come out of it on the other side. And so you're not really going to write something if you're like in the middle of the chaos. I mean,
well, and to be honest, Jared,
write bits and pieces maybe, but not the
whole thing. And that's why the book sat on the shelf for a while, because it just well, it sat on these from 2015 till 2021, so it sat on the shelf for 6 years. And then when I let God take over and let Him give me the words, it just flew out of me. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it was just it.
Yeah.
We added one chapter during the editing process, because my editor felt that there needed to be a chapter between what was the 12th chapter and what was the 14th chapter. She said there needed to be something in the middle there, so we added the new 14th chapter and bumped one back. And so that actually turned out to be one of the best chapters of the book. So it's surrendering completely is the title of that chapter, and that's what it talks about, is that giving up the control and surrendering, and trying to walk obedient to what the word said. And because we never can, we're always going to make mistakes, we're always going to fall a little bit, but it's sinning less as we grow in faith. I call it, we sin less. So
what do you think is a reason why people don't surrender completely? Like, is it because of religion and like kind of what they see maybe in other Christians is like, not that everybody's fully surrendered that's showing up to church, and it's not
Correct.
something we can really judge of someone else. Like, oh, you don't seem fully surrendered. What's your deal?
Well,
But why do you think we don't give because Jesus is telling us to lose our life so we'll find it.
Correct. And I struggled with that verse for a long time, Jared, because you got to lose your life in order to follow him, or you got to give up everything and you have to make sacrifices. Well, the sacrifices that I believe they're talking about is you might have to change some friends, because there's some friends that you're running with that when you give up that complete control and try to abide by what God's saying in the Word, you might not be able to hang out with those friends anymore, or it's surrendering time. So I get up every morning at 3:30 or 4 every morning, and that's my spiritual time. That's when I read, that's when I pray, and it's about an hour long every day. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that. That's just what I do, and it works for me. But that's a sacrifice, because I have to make the time to get up and do that. So it's just everybody's sacrifice is going to be a little different. But going back to your original question, why do people not give up? It's pride and it's arrogance, I think, because we feel we can control everything that we want to control, and we might have an idol that we don't really think is an idol, another idol is money, or it's wanting, I got to do this, I got to do that so I can get what my neighbor has. We're not supposed to do that, and so it could be a little bit of idolatry, but I really think it's more of a pride thing, because it's us, and it's for men especially, it's a pride thing. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, it's a beautiful thing to be surrendered, because that's a supernatural thing. But
well,
here's the mystery is, like, we don't see God, we
correct.
just see the fruit in our lives, or the lack of fruit. We don't see
well,
that.
And going back to that question, as I just thought, it's vulnerability too. You have to become vulnerable. You have to humble yourself, and I think that's hard for men, is the vulnerability, because we're taught in our society to be strong. We're supposed to be the providers. We're supposed to be this, that, and growing up the way I did, where I controlled everything from age 12 on, that was the hard thing for me. That was the hardest thing for me to give up. So
yeah, well, not to make a stereotype, but like, you went to the military, I'm sure you were around masculine.
Oh yeah, I was in the Marines. The only thing better is the Seabees, So I mean, so
I played hockey. That's the toughest thing I did. But other than that, I can't fight. I'm not.
Well, then I'm in the sports world with football too. So it was because so. When you're a head football coach, you got to have a little bit of arrogance and a little bit of pride, because you have to believe in what you're doing and think it's going to work. But you got to also stay humble, and there's mistakes I made along the way in that, and but I wish I would have been the Christian I am now back coaching, but we still had success. We still helped kids, and I would, there's some things I change and some things I wouldn't. So
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I mean, talking about vulnerability is a big part of this mental health space.
Yep.
And so I've gotten that compliment from people a lot, where they're like, "Oh, you're a man and you're talking about bipolar."
Yep.
And it's like, I know I'm not
absolutely
the only one,
Yeah.
But it's still a choice. Like, you can't really have successful relationships if you're not being open. I mean, you
correct
might be able to have some relationships, but it's like, oh, why don't you never talk about your life? And
exactly.
We can deflect all the time. We can go like, yeah, well, how's the Lakers doing, or whatever, and that's not necessarily bad. But then it's like, when people look you in the eye and they say like, oh, well, how are you really doing? And you're like,
right.
I don't know. I'm actually struggling with fear or anxiety.
Correct.
Like, people would be like, oh, I wasn't expecting someone like.
Well, it's nice that you said that, because it's open and honesty in a relationship with the people here. But it's the same with God. You have to be open and honest. Even though He knows our thoughts before we speak them, He still wants us to speak them, and He wants us to tell us what's on our heart. And I think that if you can't be open and vulnerable with the person who created you, because of your pride or lack of vulnerability, that's the tough part. It creates a veil, and you're not going to see what God wants you to see. So.
Yeah. All right. So last question. I have a lot of people listening that that's part of podcasting, where you you're not always sure who's listening, but want to cover all your bases sometimes. So I try to ask people, even if you don't have an experience with suicidal thoughts, but like, maybe someone's struggling. It doesn't have to be with suicide. That's a huge part of my story. So I have a real heart with that. I just want to give people hope in general, really, is also kind of the main reason for spending time on something like this, but what advice do you give to someone who is just maybe like feeling hopeless? Or I know there's a lot going on in the world, man. There's COVID. There's
COVID. There's mass shootings. Everything. The biggest thing.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I'd say to that person is find somebody you can talk to, whether it's a counselor, a pastor, or a spiritual mentor, your best friend, your husband, your wife, that you can be totally honest with, and that you're not going to get judged. Because I think that's the fear I think some people have, is when they want to talk about what's going on in their life, they're afraid they're going to be judged. And we don't want to judge them because we don't know what they're going through, and we could be the person that keeps them from committing suicide if we just sit and listen to them for a little bit of time. So that's what I would say is reach out to somebody that you respect, and just tell them, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and then let them help you. And that's what I would say. And then the last thing before I go, because this is a mental health focused podcast, Jared, is I just right before we got on, I just read an article. So do you know about the 988 national hotline that they're instituting in a couple months?
I think I've heard of that. Is that where you can text now to?
Well, you can call. It's like 911. So you can call 988, and it's a suicide hotline, or it's a mental health hotline. And I just read this article that there's only 4 there, because it was supposed to be passed through every state legislation to get money to fund it, but there's only 4 states that have done that. And so if you're out there and you believe that this will help people, call your senators, write your senators, tell them to pass the legislation so this can get into effect, because it was actually supposed to go into effect this year, but only 4 states have passed the legislation according to this article I just read. And it was right before I came on here, and I was like, okay, we need to start, and Washington and California were not 2 of the states that had passed that. I know that in the article. I don't remember the 4 states off the top of my head, so.
Dang, yeah.
No, and I don't want to bring a downer on it, but it's important, and we need that, because when I was talking to a fellow friend of mine who's a police officer, and he said that he hopes that goes into effect, because then people can call that line instead of 911, and get the help they need.
Yeah,
I'm pulling it up right now. Let's see if I can find the states.
Send it to me. I'll put it in the show notes when we publish this.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do on.
We got a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Cool. Well, John, I appreciate your time. If people want to, you have a website. I know that.
Yeah, it's brokenandredeemed.com, and people can go and order the book there right now, and I'll ship it to you. Or you can buy it off Kindle or any ebook platform that's out there, and then it'll be in bookstores August 16th of this year.
Oh, so you can order like a physical copy?
Yeah, you can from my website right now. If you go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble right now, you can pre-order it, and they'll ship it to you on August 16th. But if you want it right now, you can go to my website, and I'll ship it to you. So
okay, cool, man. That's exciting. Yeah. I'm gonna have to do that, and I try to make a commitment to people that I read their stuff when they're on the podcast. Since I don't have a book for people to read, I go.
Well, here's the thing, Jared. Just
of books from podcasts.
Hey, I would tell you, if you can find the time, you have an interesting enough story, you should write a story. So.
Yeah, I know.
And I'll send this news article to you, so you can put it in the notes. So,
yeah. All right. Well, John, thanks, man. I'll have to come visit you the next time I'm up in.
Next time you're up there in Seattle, let me know, and we'll go have a cup of coffee.
Love that. Man, I love it. I love that area. I'm a little too rainy for me, being in Cali.
Yeah, well, we actually have a California day right now. It's sunny and 75.
Now, summers are beautiful, and
absolutely.
For kids, the lakes and
stuff. Yep.
Cool. All right, John. Well, bless you, man. Thanks so much.
Bless you.
To connect, and I'll be in touch with you via email, and have a good rest of your day. So.
All right. You too. Okay. Later. Right. Blessings.
Yeah, you too.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that talk with John. We kind of scheduled this, and we were able to get it done a little last minute, so I appreciate his flexibility. Hold me accountable. I'm going to get his book, and I'm going to read it, and I'm going to leave a review. It's one of my commitments on this podcast is, unless you have like 20 books, but if you have a book, I have a pile now of books that I've bought from people and listened to, and or both or whatever, that are from this podcast. So it's filling up the library and following through with reading them. That's a conversation for another day. So hold me accountable to reading John's book. But yeah, if you guys want to order it before it comes out on print, it doesn't come out, I think, until August. And you can go to www.brokenandredeemed.com. You can order it and he'll send it to you. I think you can also get it as an ebook. I like to have books like the physical copy. That's just me. So, and if you want to get a hold of him as well, his information is on his website. So, John, thanks so much for being on here. Also, he gave me a great tool we talked about. It is an update on 988. Most states appear unprepared for National Suicide Hotline 988 to take effect. So I will put it's come from newsbreak.com. I'll put that article in the notes. You guys can check that out. It's just really important as it relates to like suicide prevention. So thank you to my guest, John. And speaking of suicide prevention, end of show notes. You guys know that I always bring up the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and it is, guys, speaking of end of show notes, and speaking of National Suicide Prevention, you guys know that I always bring this up as a resource. 1-800-273-8255. You can also go online, suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Also, NAMI.org and DBSA, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, are also great resources if you're looking for support groups. And thank you again to John for being here. Also, guys, lastly, I've been saying this a lot more because I would appreciate if people would give a review on Apple Podcasts. I'll put a link, and also you can email me, give me feedback, jared.deal@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, The Louder Now Podcast. And again, thank you guys so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the podcast. What's coming up soon is some more solo episodes, and I appreciate you guys. I know it's already summer and it's getting hot. I live in Cali, so it's just burning up today. But thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.